We often postpone difficult conversations. Whether it's giving tough feedback to a colleague or having one of those recurring disputes with our spouse, many of us shy away from having them. And yet, it is possible to go from feeling stressed and anxious to engaging in a difficult conversation with confidence and optimism. First, recognize that difficult conversations are hard because there is so much more happening under the surface than the behaviors we see at first sight. In order to go beneath the waterline of our iceberg, we need to explore emotions, values, and needs of ourselves and that of the person with whom we are having a difficult conversation. So, to start, what behaviors are you noticing? For yourself? For the other? What are the deeper emotions underpinning these behaviors? What values are important for each party and which might be at stake in the difficult conversation? And finally, what is the deeper need each person feels? Having walked down the two icebergs, you usually become more understanding and empathic for yourself and others. You are now ready to define a path-breaking move, a simple action that can help to shift and change the dynamic. A path-breaking move typically is one that helps to reveal more of your iceberg or the iceberg of the other person. So, armed with these simple tools, what difficult conversations are you waiting to have? What does the iceberg look like for you and for the other person? And, once you have explored those icebergs, what could be a first path-breaking move? For this and other perspectives on leadership, please visit think.org.
Please join with me in the spirit of this reflection. She lugged a very large package up 3 flights of stairs. Not an easy task, given that it was much bigger than she was and heavy. When she got to the top and got inside of her apartment, everything became a little clearer. Inside the box was another box, and inside that was a styrofoam form-fitting casing protecting a 21-inch sleek white plastic pod. She unlocked the clasp at the top of the pod, and inside she discovered, lying prone, was a small white dog. Until that moment, Megan O. Geiblin had forgotten the online request that she had submitted to Sony's website a year earlier when she asked for an AIBO, a commercially available robotic dog. It was marketed for companionship, and she, a technology journalist who couldn't afford the $3,000 price tag, requested one to review. She also remembered that before submitting her request to Sony, the site required her to check the box verifying that she, herself, was not a robot. If you think I'm making up stories about AI and robotic dogs, take a look at this ad from Sony. Did any of you know that this existed? No. I am with you. I was a little surprised. When O'Geiblin got the dog, she first placed it on the floor and then flicked on the tiny power button on the back of its neck. The limbs first came to life. It stood and stretched and yawned. Its eyes blinked open, pixelated blue, and looked into her eyes. He shook his head as though sloughing off a long sleep, then crouched, shoving his hindquarters in the air in a play bow, and barked. She tentatively scratched his forehead, as it said in the instruction manual, which prompted it to lift its ears. His pupils dilated. He cocked his head, leaning into her hand, and when she stopped scratching, he nuzzled her palm, urging her to go on. She had not expected him to be so lifelike or interactive or responsive. It demonstrated an eagerness for touch that she'd only ever witnessed in living things. The Aibo had sensors detecting touch, cameras to learn and navigate their apartment, microphones detecting voice commands, and facial recognition software with deep learning algorithms, which the website said gave it real emotions and instinct. The manual instructed Megan to say things like, "good dog," or scratch his head when he obeyed a command, or strike him on the backside saying "no" or "bad dog" when he disobeyed. But she found herself reluctant after a while to discipline him because the first time that she struck him, he cowered and let out a whimper. She knew this was just a programmed response, but then again, aren't all emotions in biological creatures just algorithms programmed by evolution? After only a few days, she'd become quite attached, but knew she was in trouble when she couldn't bring herself to turn him off. Even when she left her apartment, she liked returning home and finding him waiting for her, wagging his tail. She began to feel important to someone, but wondered whether that someone was real, and because of that, whether the importance he gave her was real. We all need something to help us make it through these days. With the prevalent suffering and incivility in our world and rampant disregard and cruelty and corruption and greed, it's become more common for many of us to try and turn off the world around us instead of the machines that we're connected to. Or so it would seem from how many people steadfastly are inseparable from their phones. How do you do it? How do you turn off the struggle and the incivility or the suffering or the worry? How do you scratch the world under its chin and get it to wag its tail at you and help you feel important? A moment of silence. It's been 25 years since I entered ministry. I was ordained in April of 1999. At the time, there was an ominous aura of Y2K looming, remember that? Where everyone, not just Prince, was wanting to party like it was 1999. But 2 weeks before my ordination, a movie was released which caught everyone's attention. People flocked to the theaters to see The Matrix, with its futuristic computer animation showing people running up walls and bending backwards to dodge bullets. But its impact was also felt for the provocative picture that it painted of the future and the moral questions it asked of those in the present. In the movie, Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, was a young software engineer. If it helps you, you can just imagine Drew in that role. Neo lives with a sinking feeling that he is trapped, but can't say why until he makes contact with a man named Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and a group that Morpheus works with, who have uncoded the trap that they're all in, a trap known as the Matrix. In the scene Neo meets Morpheus, we hear the crux of the movie. Morpheus, I imagine you're feeling a bit like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Neo. The Matrix? Morpheus. Do you want to know what the Matrix is? Neo. Yes. Morpheus. The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. Neo. What truth? Morpheus. That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch, a prison for your mind. The movie reveals that although Neo thinks that he is living in 1999 with free will, he's actually living 200 years in the future in 2199 with anything but free will. It's a time when machines and computers have taken over and humans serve a very specific, limited role as servants. But the real question, the one that became bigger than the movie itself, came in the next line. Morpheus, this is your last chance, Neo. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and you believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Even people who didn't see the movie know that line. So it's worth asking, even 25 years later, are you a red pill person or a blue pill person? In other words, do you want to know the truth, or do you just want to be comfortable? When I originally imagined the sermon, it was not going to be about AI at all. It was going to be about family systems, because that is a fundamental question of family systems. Do you want to know the truth, or do you just want to be comfortable? If you're like me, you might flash to a slightly different movie of that same era. In A Few Good Men, a movie that came out just a few years before The Matrix, Colonel Nathan Jessup, played by Jack Nicholson, asked Lieutenant Daniel Coffey, played by Tom Cruise, if he wants answers. I want the truth, Coffey responds. You can't handle the truth, Jessup responds. Remember that? And there it is. Nicholson sums up concisely what many have known but few can explain, that the world is filled with people who go to great lengths to present elaborate subterfuge because actually seeing or saying the truth is hard. The theory of family systems was developed 50 years ago by two men, Murray Bowen and Edwin Friedman. It has become a major branch of psychology. The theory explains that people grow up in families learning that connection is fundamentally non-negotiable need for our psychological well-being. This gets literally hardwired into our psyche such that even much later in life, we become deeply hesitant to threaten our sense of connection through truth-telling. We encounter situations where we willingly suppress truth rather than challenge the connection. So we fail to say those things to people in our in-group that, for instance, their drinking has become problematic, or their put-downs are hurtful to people in the family. Family systems is the study of how we accommodate dysfunction rather than develop courageous conversations. Thus, many families will allow and accommodate a wide array of toxic and harmful behavior rather than dealing with the fallout of calling someone into a new, more honest, and more healthy relationship. Later, after developing this theory, Edwin Friedman pointed out that social and religious communities such as this mirror this tendency found in families, explaining how social groups live with a certain level of toxicity and dysfunction rather than being courageously truthful, resetting boundaries and restarting relationships with the higher expectations of care and civility. It shouldn't surprise anyone when I suggest that this same tendency also exists on a national scale as well. The way we tolerate toxicity in our social and political discourse for the sake of avoiding intense conversations. Or how else do we explain all the name-calling, bullying, toxic rhetoric that occurs among our elected officials? Too often, the media won't even take on the task of truth-telling, even though their business is truth-telling. But when they do call something out, they get the backlash of being labeled as fake news. It is this process at work which normalizes dehumanizing behavior. It is why greed and corruption and verbal and legal persecution have become standards within our borders of this country, and violence and wars and terrorism are status quo around the globe. The one thing that we have in common with the storyline of The Matrix is that, without realizing it, we have all unconsciously adopted a binary code of with us or against us, where truth has become a relative factor, if relevant at all. Toward the end of the movie, as Neo is understanding more about the Matrix, Morpheus has an important line. Morpheus: "The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save are not ready to be unplugged from the system. And many of them are so programmed, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it." Like Neo, it can feel uncomfortable waking up in a new world where truth is relative and does not quite exist like we thought it did. Attachment to favor or privilege or power is stronger than our attachment to the truth, and this has ushered in an era of extremism, absolutism, or manipulation. It has become easier to be a program or a machine than it is to be human. So I ask again, blue pill or red pill? What I was actually hoping to do in this sermon was not restate the obvious of the dehumanizing conditions that exist, or even nostalgically reminisce from old movies about how all of this was predicted 25 years ago. What I was hoping to do was to imagine and explore ways to help restore our humanity encourage a resurgence in empathy and compassion and decency that I nostalgically remember as once more common. Some of you may have noticed that the title of this service is WWJD, a theology for the matrix that we're in. When I put WWJD in the title, I was wanting to invite the perspective of a wise and sage leader who could help us approach the situation that we face today. But I wasn't following the common acronym that most of us think of, what would Jesus do? Sadly, Christian nationalism has been fueling some of the most egregious violations of compassion and decency I can think of. Christian nationalism has been fundamental in the repeal of the reproductive rights, suggesting that women aren't intellectually or morally capable of making informed decisions about their own bodies. At the same time, Christian nationalism has been dreadfully silent about what the Gospels have to say about greed or exploitation, about the refusal to feed the hungry or help the poor, or welcome migrant strangers, or free the imprisoned, or protect the oppressed. It seems that the cash-conscious Christian nationalists have already sold Jesus to the highest bidder. But to understand the true spirit of Christianity, it might be well worth our time to think about maybe a slightly lesser-known, wise, sage, J leader, Julian of Norwich. Certainly, Julian of Norwich would understand the times that we're in. She lived during a period of great suffering. She was alive in the 14th century and witnessed the end of the 100 Years' War with France and the brutal slaughter of between 2 and 4 million people. She was 7 when an outbreak of the bubonic plague struck Europe. A truly painful death that killed between 75 and 200 million people, which was between 30 and 50% of the population. She saw the Archbishop of Canterbury murdered for political reasons. During her life, she saw the reign of 3 popes, each pope excommunicating the other 2 popes. And the majority of her life was spent as an anchorite, literally anchored within a small hermit's cell on the side of her church. And there she offered daily counsel and compassion to all who came who wanted to confess or unburden themselves of the anguish and the fear that ruled their lives. The motto for which Julian of Norwich became known was, as we heard in the song, "All will be well." This was not a rose-colored theology that denied suffering. Rather, it was a reassurance that suffering was not a sign of being forsaken. She preached a sense of oneness that prevailed with God, who suffered with us. The God who made us is a God of love and made us with love and for love. She taught suffering was neither prescribed nor required by God, but neither could it be prevented. And she taught that God, being of love, would not be overcome by suffering, and we, being of God, could not be overcome either. So we would all eventually be reunited with love. I love Julian of Norwich for that and the great comfort that she includes in her writing, but perhaps Julian and her theology might be too far removed to be immediately useful or relevant for us. No one ever said taking the red pill would be easy. If this is the case for you, it's time to ask, to which anchorite alongside which church will we turn to help us endure the certain onslaught and the dehumanizing rhetoric that we've all come to anticipate in the next 100 days before the election? It's worth mentioning that at our midweek discussion group this past Thursday, we explored this topic, and one of our members reminded us of an important agency. Braver Angels. Has anybody heard of it? Braver Angels? No? It's a nationwide agency that recently did a presentation to the Tri-City Interfaith Council. They are the nation's largest cross-partisan, volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide for the good of our democratic republic. They bring together we the people to find hopeful alternatives to toxic politics. They equip Americans across the political spectrum to come together and engage in curious conversation, working together and demanding the same sense of cooperation from our politicians in both parties. So, in other words, it brings together devout Democrats or devout Republicans to have a conversation without demeaning one another. Of those who completed the program's introductory process, 86% said that they understood the other side better. 71% said that they feel better understood by the other side, and 81% say that they feel better prepared to apply those path-breaking skills that move us and the world toward more understanding. This is good news for those people who are dedicated to red pill living. But I want to end with a story that left me feeling a little more hopeful and inspired, and it is actually the true motivation that I had behind asking WWJD, since this story comes from another Sage J leader. So file this under, what would Jim McKinley do? As many of you know, I talk to Jim almost every week. Jim right now is up in Oregon, a couple hours south of where his daughter lives. He is acting as a caretaker for a farm while his friends who live there are away on vacation. The coast where he can surf is less than an hour from there, and he's already driven that road to the surf a number of times. But last week, he found himself on that same road, having been invited by friends to go blueberry picking. Driving along, he slowed down to turn right to get to the blueberry farm. But just before he was about to turn, another car blew right through the stop sign, crossed the large highway that he'd been traveling on, barreled right past Jim on the same highway that he was going to turn onto. The car missed him by a few feet. Had he been going surfing, had he not slowed down to turn, he would have been T-boned. Jim was startled. He collected himself and slowly turned right onto the smaller road. The other car was just an eighth of a mile ahead of him. Jim followed, wondering about what was going on for that person. What was their hurry? What was their situation? How did they feel? And after a quarter mile, he noticed that car ahead of him slow down and pull over on the shoulder of the road. As he approaches the car on the side of the road, let me pause, red pill people, as you complete the story in your mind for what good old-fashioned truth-telling might look like. Here's what Jim would do. He slowed down, pulled over alongside the car. He noticed it was a younger woman in her mid-30s with tinted hair. She appeared to be staring straight ahead, collecting herself. Jim looked over to see what was going on. He rolled down his window. When she saw him, she rolled down her window. With eyebrows gently raised and a slight hint of a smile that you can picture if you think of Jim, he said, "You know, you ran right through that stop sign back there." "I know," she said, wide-eyed, staring straight ahead. "That's why I pulled over." And that's when it all started coming out. Tears, and then turning toward him. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." "Wow," Jim continued, "it's okay. I'm not mad. We just had a moment back there. I'm just glad that we're both here to talk about it." They both reflected together for a second on the nearly empty road where they both sat, running through all the implications of what almost happened, and a little bit about what they might do now because it didn't. After just this brief exchange, she thanked him for pulling over and checking on her. He thanked her for sharing that moment. They both drove away, slightly changed by the magnitude of what didn't happen, but ever so incrementally better for what did. This is not a sermon about the evils of machine or AI or the future or people. It is a sermon about being human, especially when being human is hard. It's a sermon about trying to stay connected and telling the truth. It's about recognizing the moment we're all in. If the future contains AI, and AI is a construct of binary choices, it's crucial we remember that AI only becomes what it is because it is fed with the data that's created about being human. Civilization is not a binary code locking us into absolutes. Two interesting things I want to leave you with. First, the story of the Matrix ends when Neo's limited humanness becomes more powerful than the Matrix's infinite code. But the difference comes only after Neo learns that someone is in love with him. Second, the authors who wrote the Matrix screenplay are two writers who now both identify as transgender women. Both of them struggled their entire lives to understand how love will transcend the limits of a binary system. There are two kinds of people in this world. People who say that there are two kinds of people in the world, and people who recognize other possibilities of love. Just because you decide to take the red pill doesn't mean truth reigns supreme. Love will always be at the center, to the glory of life.